Hello, MrTieDye. Welcome to my channel. So I've been doing some Halloween designs. I had done several of them, and then I ran into my school project, but I still had one more that I wanted to do. Somebody had requested a Jason mask, and I figured Halloween time is the best time for that. So I made myself one of these stencils. Yeah, I don't know if you... Yeah, there you go. So I cut all the little holes out just to give me markers where I can put some dots. And then we're going to get this drawn on here. And what I'm starting with is a tea that's been soaked in soda ash. It's been spun out, and then I've centered it, so I pulled just the front forward and the back. I will be flipping the back. We're going to tie this on just the front of the tea. So I'm going to start out by just doing the outline of the mask. And the eyeball in here. And then I'm just putting a dot in each one of these holes so that I know where to tie those at. Then with a different color marker, I'm going to put the other highlights in here. Okay, so for this one here, like I say, I'm going to tie it on just the front of the T. So I'll fold the back out of my way here. And then I'm going to go along, well, first I'm going to start with the eyeball, and then I'm going to go along and tie each one of these dots up. So this one here is going to take a little bit of time. I'll probably put it on fast forward to go through most of that after I show you a couple of them. So to start out with, I'm going to fold that eyeball, and I'm holding this up to the light so that I can look through the t-shirt and see that I have that lined up correctly. Once I have that done, then I'm going to tie a slip knot in my kite string, so that's ready to go. And then I'm going to fold this eye up. And I'm just doing little tiny accordion folds. Okay, once I have that, then I got my slip knot ready to go to slide over that and tighten it down. Okay, so that first one there, now I'm going to pull the excess fabric out of here and being sure that I don't go up past my tie line here. But I want that excess fabric out of that fold there. And now for the other two details, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fold them in half and do accordion folds for those. So I'm just lining these lines up, and I can check it by looking at the light behind here. And I have those folded up, or lined up correctly. And some of these things are just little tiny folds because they're little tiny details. Okay, so those are the two little red details on the hockey mask. And now we have all of these different air holes in the hockey mask. So the way that I tie those up is you just find a stick of some sort. And I'm just using the smaller end of my cuticle pusher here. So what I'm going to do is just poke that underneath there. I'm not putting too much pressure on it, just a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is wrap around that and tie that off. So I'm going bigger than the dot, of course. The dot was just for my placement, and now I can make the hole a little bit bigger. And I'll pull that out and then tie that off. And I didn't leave myself much of a tail here. Okay, next time leave a bigger tail. Okay, I got that one. So that's going to be the process here, is just poking that up and then tying it off. And I think maybe slip knots like I was doing before. I don't know why I tried to just tie that freehand. Okay. So slide that over top and tighten it down. Once you tighten it down, I usually will wrap that a little bit more and tie it off. And these are all going to be tiny little black dots, so I'm going to be using thick black dye for this, just to make sure it doesn't spread down into the mask area. And you can make these bigger or larger, just however you feel you want to do them. Like I say, I put a dot for the general area, and then I can determine how big of a hole just by how much of the fabric I'm gathering in there. Let's zoom in for just a little bit. So you can see I'm just tying that around there. Once I get that tightened down, then I pull my cuticle pusher out, tighten it down a little bit more, wrap it a couple times, and then tie it off. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back out, and I'm going to go into fast forward mode while I tie the rest of these up here. There are all of the little air holes in the mask. So now what I'm going to do is fold up around the mask and get this tied off. And some of these are just a little bit tight because I got these little air holes in the hockey mask right next to the outer line there. But you just got to make sure that as you're doing your folds that those don't get tucked down inside. And if they do, you'll need to make sure you work them back out before you start dyeing. Is the hockey mask, Jason's hockey mask here. So I'm not going to try to tie the mask itself because I have so many little dots. I'm going to dye this with that all the way open like that, because all I'm going to be doing is coloring these and then putting some thick water around here to keep the dye from spreading out there. So that's how I'm going to leave this here for now. Just like that. And that way I can get in there and get all of these little bits dyed up just how I want them. So the rest of this I'm going to scrunch up. I'll probably put a spine up the back here. There is the Jason mask. We'll be back with some gloves on, get some dye put on this thing. Okay, we're back to put some dye on this thing. So I'm going to save the mask part for last because I don't want to, as I'm moving this thing around, drag around. As it is, when I start putting the dye on all of these tiny little spots here, then I'm going to have to be really careful just how I move it around. So I'm going to dye that last. So to start with, I think I'm going to go ahead and dye the spine here. And I'm going to dye the majority of the tee in the green and the purple and then put black over top. So I'm just going to go along. Let's see, I'll draw my other line on here. So for the mask, I'm just drawing the outline on the back side. I can see the line shining through with the light here. So I was just drawing the line on the back side there, the same one. So now I'm going to put some purple on, put some green on, put some black on, and then we'll flip it over, dye the rest of it, and then I'll get to the mask. And over here I am dyeing and leaving a gap here so that dye can spread, and then I will add more dye up. I'll touch that up at the end there. So I'm doing the same thing here on the front. I'm leaving this white gap here between my line and the rest of the tee here. Okay, start with, I'm going to dye the outer edge here of the mask, and I'm using this thick black dye. course I have to push that in with the cuticle pusher. Okay, now what I'm doing here is I'm going to dye. I got a red highlight here, and I'm just using regular red dye. This isn't thickened, but I'm going to put some on, and then I'm going to use a dry rag to kind of squeeze it in, but also to soak up the excess. And then I can kind of see a little bit of white area there, so I can touch that back up again and then squeeze it again with the rag. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this other red area. And using these bottles with the very fine tips definitely helps, because you can apply the dye just a drop at a time here. So that squeezes the dye in, but it also soaks up the excess dye. And sometimes it'll kind of reveal an area that looks a little bit light, so I know that I need to add a little bit more dye into it. So I always like to keep clean, dry rags around for that purpose. And now we're going to go along and start dyeing all of these little other black nubs here that are going to be the air holes of the mask, the hockey mask. Main thing is just trying to make sure my hands are completely clean. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to dye these, and then I'm going to squeeze them. And this here happens to be the thick black dye, but I think you should be able to do this with the thin, with regular black dye, if you wanted to. So now there's my Jason mask, and it does look like I got a little bit of extra grime on the back side there. I'm going to touch up this line just a little bit here. It's spread most of the way up. Oh, and I'm going to add some thick water to my mask just to help no more of the dye try to leach up into there. So I don't want this dye to continue. Sorry. I keep forgetting about you guys out there. Okay, so I'm putting some thick water on the rest of the mask here. This is the back side of the mask. And what this does is wet this down so that the dye from here doesn't try to leach up into the dry spot there. So I'll put this up on the top also. Okay, last thing left to do here now, I'm going to put some black dye over top of the whole tee. And then this will be ready to batch for 48 hours, and then I'll get it washed. So I'm going to squirt the backside first. And then we'll put some on the front. And this is just the black dye, regular black dye. It's not thickened or anything. Okay, and there's the Jason mask. I'm going to add just a little bit more water here just to make sure that this is plenty wet and it doesn't attract more liquid to soak up into there. But this is ready to batch for 48 hours, and then I'll get it washed and have it picture here in just a couple seconds for you.